I'm Kathy Woodard with Clemson University Public Service and Agriculture, and I'm here at the South Carolina Water Resources Conference in Columbia, South Carolina. And I have with me a hydrogeologist from South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control, and it is Berezowska.
Yes, ma'am.
And she has done a presentation this morning on South Carolina water resources, and it was talking a lot about what some of our most pressing needs might be and some critical things that we need to take care of as it relates to planning for our future. So Amira, can you talk to us about what those things are?
Absolutely. So I think one of the biggest things we're facing is definitely climatic variability. So we go through periods of drought and we have heavy rains, and so it's hard to plan for when we're going to have that recharge in the aquifers or surface water availability in order to take care of our needs as a state. So I'd say conjunctive use is probably the best way to remedy those variabilities in the climate.
So what is conjunctive use?
So conjunctive use is using groundwater and surface water together when it makes most sense. Surface water is definitely more readily available throughout the year, definitely mostly during the winter and spring and fall months. So you kind of want to look at it as a checking and a savings account. So groundwater you want to use as a savings account. It's there when you need it, and you don't want to use too much of it because it takes longer to recharge. While surface water is there more readily, and then you can use that as more of the checking account.
So what are some of the things that you're doing at DHEC as far as it relates to water planning?
We leave most of the water planning to DNR, but we do work with them as a sister agency. We're doing more of how we can manage the water resources generally. So we're looking at making the rest of the coastal plain a capacity use area, which is a really big thing we're pushing right now. We currently have a western capacity use area that is going to the board, so that would help us able to manage the groundwater all over the coastal plain, which works together with our surface water program in order to manage those together.
So what would you say is the biggest emerging concern as it relates to future water availability?
Population growth. We're seeing huge population growth in Charleston, so being able to have the public water needs for that and make sure it's sustainable is probably one of the biggest things we're looking at. Down there we have a lot of surface water availability, and so we're trying to move a lot of the groundwater use to surface water use.
So this is the conjunctive use you
the
were
conjunctive,
talking about.
exactly, yes. So there's a lot of groundwater there, but with such a large population, it's better to support it off of the surface water that's going into the ocean anyways.
So do you see this as a statewide problem, or is it in these areas that are experiencing this large population growth?
It's more of these smaller areas, these regions that are exploding with population. Greenville is exploding, but they use surface water. That's how they provide water up there, because there's not groundwater availability. So in Charleston, I would love to see us move even more towards the surface water. Most areas down there are using it, and so we're trying to get everyone on board.
Okay. And what are some other things going on at DHEC related to, I know you guys are always in the paper as it relates to flooding and dealing with floods and those sorts of things.
Yeah, those are big things. We're just trying to make sure that people are aware of the concerns of where they are as far as flooding, and if they have private well concerns. And so a lot of the rural areas, when it floods, they provide their own water from wells. So we have to make sure that we're keeping the population healthy through their own water supplies and making sure they're disinfected and things like that. So the large storms, it's hard sometimes.
Yeah, that's true. And you mentioned at the very beginning to talk about one of the big changes or the things that you're dealing with are these climatic extremes that we're experiencing.
Right.
And we've talked a little bit about the flood issues, but what about the drought kind of situations? How does that impact you and what your agency does?
Well, that ties right back to the conjunctive use. So when there's drought situations, the surface water is not going to be as readily available. So the groundwater feeds surface water, but if we're not getting rain, then there's not rain to fill those rivers and streams. So that's when we go back to looking at, okay, so we're trying to mainly use surface water when we have it available. But then when we are in these drought conditions, it's great to use groundwater because it's that savings account that we can pull out of. So it's really just trying to balance both of those together going forward.
So what do you see in your role as being the next step that South Carolina as a whole needs to take as it relates to water resource management?
We have to just make sure that we put aside maybe some of the political pressures that we see and really focus on the environment and making sure that we have that water available, and we have to focus on how is the best way we can make sure everyone gets what they want, but we also have that sustainability. So I think it's important, especially with the water, state water plan going forward. I think it's going to be a big deal as far as water resource management to get that under control.
All right. Well, thank you so much for giving us some of your time today.
Absolutely.